5, 6, 7, 8.
Hi EXers, welcome to the EX Podcast episode number 57. This is your host, Stefan Vincent. I'm here today with you because we need to shake things up in the world of HR, talent acquisition, and company culture in order to create positive employee experiences in our organizations. Your workplace doesn't have to be a dreadful place where employees feel disengaged. This podcast brings a different lens to the HR, employee engagement, and company culture conversation. We approach these topics from a brand and customer experience angle rather than a traditional HR angle. Our guests, all thought leaders and disruptors in the EX space in their own way, come to this show to share best practices on the key elements that foster employee engagement and strengthen company culture, and also to spark the conversation on how to create these positive employee experiences. Not every company can do what Airbnb or Google do around their employee experience. And this is what this show is all about. Sharing stories of companies of all sizes, not only to show that EX doesn't require a large budget or a large team, but also that there isn't one recipe. Each company can find its own way through the EX journey. Today's guest is Mark Williams, Chief Marketing Officer at MHR and People First. Today with Mark, we will talk about why it is critical for employers to change their mindsets and adopt more of a consumer approach to engage with their employees. What organizations should do to create personalized employee experiences. What place technology and the human elements play in designing these experiences. What companies should do to ensure privacy while using employee data to deliver those experiences, and which metrics companies should put in place to measure the effectiveness of their EX initiatives and the impact on the business. This episode is brought to you by Fusion Alliance. Fusion Alliance delivers holistic solutions fusing together data, digital and technology to redefine customer experiences and move your ideas to execution. That's why businesses across multiple industries have relied on Fusion's expertise and partnership for over 25 years. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Mark. And because it takes a good amount of time to produce this podcast, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube, as it will help promote the content. If you want me to speak at your next event, get some advice on your EX initiatives, or send me feedback, suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at EX_summit. All right, let's get to this conversation with Mark. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the EX Podcast. Super excited for today's guest, Mark Williams. Mark is calling from Nottingham in the UK, and he is the Chief Marketing Officer at MHR and People First. Mark, thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Just very first easy question. Who is Mark Williams and what brought you to MHR?
So I guess originally I was into art and design, so I did a degree in fine art, more like kind of interactive art, so installations as you kind of call it now. Then I got into, before your time I'm sure, but into kind of multimedia CD-ROMs, and then into web design after that, and then became a developer. And now I kind of gone through so when I was a developer, I got more into the research side and the sociological side of what we were doing. And so at MHR, and with the product People First, we, starting from a blank sheet, we thought, we want to make some software to fix work, and you can't just do that with software. So there was a whole kind of work ethos piece around it that meant that we pulled the two together. So that's basically who I am and what I do. So I'm in charge of the product teams here, from product planning, research, design, and marketing.
It's kind of a bold statement to say that you want to change the way we work. How does MHR and People First do change the way we work?
It's even bolder to say we want to fix it, I think. So we know that 9 out of 10 people globally don't enjoy their jobs, and part of that is to do with that we used to work in factories, and the work that was available was based on where you lived, and whilst all of our online experiences are becoming more personalized and relate to who you are as a person, work somehow isn't. It's still very kind of formulaic. It doesn't. Who you are is kind of ironed out into a job role, and so what we're looking at in People First is how we can first allow you to kind of learn more about yourself and how you work. It's a bit like a Fitbit for work, but then also how the alliance between an employer and an employee works better together, because it's no longer you're a slave for the employer for however long you're there for. It's more of an alliance between my talent is available for this period of time, and then how do you align them together? And finding that way of doing it. So the reason why employers would want to us is because productivity gets higher the more engaged or sophisticated the X is.
So let's talk about this a bit more specifically. The foundation of the EX podcast is to bring a brand and customer experience approach to the traditional company culture, HR, and talent acquisition conversation. And we live in the era of what we call experience consumerism, where as individuals, we crave for experiences as consumers and as employees. So in your mind, why is it critical for employers to change their mindsets and adopt more of a consumer approach to engage with the employees?
Well, I think ultimately they won't get any employees, So if we look at the generational breakdown of employees, by 2020 we're going to have 50%. I hate the term, but millennials, and everybody up to kind of my parents' generation is becoming more. So they want inspirational. They want that experience. They want a meaningful experience at work. They will not accept our traditional kind of our parents' generations. Well, that's okay. It's just a job, and I think, and that's kind of double-edged sword. But I think that's generally so. The best employers will get the talent that they need by making sure that they're reaching out to the people without putting them into boxes, and getting the best of the talent through that kind of stuff.
Many companies still approach company culture and work environments as a one-size-fits-all initiative. And the disconnect is that employees look for more personalized experiences as we look for personalized experiences as consumers as well. What organizations should do to create those personalized experiences?
Yeah, I think some of it's very simple. I think move away from fixed job descriptions. So talk about the person without a specific role, because hopefully you're going to allow them to grow. Keep things project-based. So making sure that you're kind of checking in on them often. But got the autonomy to let them go, but also just ask them, so ask them and give the expectation that they know what they want, and then they can align that with what you want. And it gets, it's not parent-child like an old industrial relationship would be, or a working relationship. It is adult to adult. So there is sometimes difficult conversations to be had, but that's good, that's healthy, that's creative. So, yeah, the personalized experience is all about just being open with one another and being less constrained by a specific job role over time than here's a project-based kind of way where we can roll with your particular skills in a way that's still manageable for the company.
So you've mentioned a couple of times a project-based type of work. Do you think that now the job descriptions are irrelevant, meaning that we can't really put in words a very specific type of role because it really depends on the individual's skills, and then it's more about bringing people together from different teams working on specific projects with a defined outcome, so that people are going to move from one project to another, but they may work in different things every 6 months or every year or so. Do you think that job descriptions are still relevant, or have they become irrelevant?
I think in good jobs they're irrelevant. I think if you can write a job description about it, you're halfway to automating it, and you're taking the good thing about being a human, in that we're adaptive, we can grow into new situations. It's our collaboration with others that actually kind of makes us better and outputs a better whole. I'd like them to disappear. Put it that way.
So, could you define what you mean by project-based work? What is it exactly?
Yeah, so if you set up your structure in terms of teams or tribes, so if you look at the Spotify model, they've got kind of teams and tribes, and the projects themselves might be a new piece. So I come from a software background, so it could be a new piece of functionality where the developers themselves can say, let's say we have 5 things that we'd like to do, and the developers themselves may say, well, I vote for this one, I'd like to get involved with that one. And so it's also a much more intrinsically motivated project, because I'm not having the choice to being involved in something means that I'm motivated from the start. Now there is an issue where some stuff might need to get done that nobody wants to do, but then you will get some people who will also say, or you can manage that out. But I think there are other ways of slicing and dicing the way that we currently think that we can just bump everybody into one thing and it'll be okay.
Do you think that this type of work is only available in software tech companies, or can it be applied to any types of industry?
I think it can be applied to any types of industry, yeah. I think where software is particularly interesting is because it's highly sought after. And I think that's where, in terms of the science that's being thrown at it, that's where you're getting most of the action. But ultimately, it's a bit like flexible working. These practices will disseminate throughout all industries, because you'll still want to keep hold of the talent that hasn't kind of been automated out.
How important is technology such as AI or machine learning to design those experiences, and what place the human elements still plays in designing these experiences?
I don't think the technology is important at all. I think what's important is what you're trying to do, and I think some of this is very, very simple. You're connecting as an employer with an enlightened leader with your staff. I think the problem comes where the amount of other things we've got to do mean that it's just very difficult to administrate. So, for instance, I may be an excellent people manager and I'm with all the time in the world, and I know my stuff very well, and I can immediately know how to motivate them, how to, but this would be a very rare occurrence. And I think where the technology comes in is to just help us to do those bits. So the bits that the best of ourselves could do, but when we need help, when we, when it's the speed of what we're expected to do, and the kind of focus in the moment kind of falls away from us. Sometimes, so that what we aim to do is that the technology helps you out in those stages. It almost is coaching you to be the best boss to your staff, and vice versa. That the employee is learning about themselves and knowing what questions to ask, or whether to say I'm ready for a new challenge, or no, this is okay for me.
Do you see technology as detrimental or supportive of human interactions and connections?
So here, I mean, it's supportive because we kind of we make it that way. I think, like all technology, it's what you do with it it's not neutral. It's neutral by itself, but the people who build it aren't neutral. They've got their own biases as to what efficiency is, what humanness is. I think for a long time we've just been trying to make us more efficient, and I think that has taken the humanness of what we do away. And I think technology now, so we're at a stage now where we can use technology to take away the need for, and so it's not taking away the need for efficiency, but we can have a baseline of efficiency where actually what makes a difference in our competitive advantage is human traits. So kind of creativity, face-to-face negotiations, those kind of human interactions that actually make all the difference.
So let's go back to the artificial intelligence and machine learning as new technologies. How do you see those enhancing the way companies design and deliver experiences to their employees? And how far can we push personalization using AI or machine learning, for instance?
I can talk a little bit about. So again, I think there are good and bad ways you can use it. Let me talk a little bit about how we use it. There's a thing in gaming called flow, and if you can imagine a kind of graph, and on the x and y axis you've got how difficult the game is and how good you are at it on the other axis. And there's a sweet spot in the middle where if the game's too hard and you're not very good at it, you'll stop playing. And if you're very good at it but the game's too easy, you'll stop playing. And there's a sweet spot in the middle, and that's what you'd call it flow in gaming. And the point of the game is to keep it as difficult as you are good at it, and therefore you'll keep playing, you'll keep growing, you'll keep better. And there could not be a better metaphor for what the sweet spot for work should be, is that we should be being challenged, but in a safe way that we can kind of continually grow. So I think what we look at in terms of our AI and ML is both what we're doing outside of, so actions that we're taking, but also reflections that we've got on ourselves. So, for instance, at the end of every day, you get a debrief message in our chatbot. It's a notification that comes up, and you just ask you about the day. It's called a daily reconstruction method, if you want to get into the kind of researchy terms for it. But it's the quickest way that I can remember this, so that I can come back and talk about it in my check-in. Now, this gives us, starts to give us a map of, so again, like a Fitbit for work, which is held on device. So the statistical model is held on device, which then can pass back to the main system without it being, I don't know the detail of my day, so I don't know what you've put into your system, but I know it can plot into a flow and show where you are on that diagram. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So there are things like that where, and there's all sorts of other stuff like, so NLG, which is natural language generation. So a lot of people have heard of NLP, which is natural language processing. But NLG is a way to take data and put it into sentences. So it means that so in terms of analytics, they can be pushed to you as a notification and saying, the system can take the place of a lot of administrative tasks and just rather than you having to dig around for any analytics or any insights, then it just pushes it to you using NLG, which is, it feels so much friendlier and natural than just, I've got a dashboard of graphs to dig through in order to get anything. And obviously for employees who, I don't want to bother with any graphs. All I want to do is, just a much more friendly interface. Then it works for them better too.
There is a lot of scrutiny and concern about collecting and leveraging employee data. What companies should do to ensure privacy while using the data to deliver personalized experiences to the employees?
Yeah, so there's a thing in Europe now called GDPR, and I think it's had some effect on the States, and that is the kind of to tell them what you're going to do, give them the right to be forgotten. But I think that the nuances behind that in terms of employees' data is, I think if you overtrack and make too much of it without telling the employee, they'll just change behaviour. And we know that. There's plenty of studies where if they know that there's an outcome that comes from less than perfect data that they've said. So let's say in our product, we have a private diary that's private on device. But if there was a loop where suddenly your manager's behaviour to you changed because of you think you put something in the diary, then you would stop doing it. And then you've got your kind of the amount of truth or even the amount of activity that you're going to put in gets, there's no point in having any data because it's all skewed. So I think, for me, and what we're looking at in the longer term later in the year is the employees' data is their data. And it's weird and old-fashioned to think about an employer holding my personal data. It should be my data that then is kind of shared with the employer. So we're looking at ways that you can effectively have a personal account, which then gets shared, and then I could take it from employer to employer. It's then my data. And again, kind of expanding out what it means to grow. So we talk about employers kind of growing your career, but it's your career, and that should sit outside of many different employers as you kind of grow a path through it. But that data should still be evolving, still be measured in a way that's yours privately.
Do you think that it's going to be a point of discussion between candidates and employers before they actually decide to work together and sign a letter of agreements, that there will be some discussions around who owns the data and how much is used or shared with third parties? Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's so there's a number of things that you sign up to. If you're a people first employer and you're doing some recruitment, there's an alliance between, so it sets the expectations between employer and employee, and then there's also here's how we're going to deal with your data. And I think your data empowerment as an employee, again, it's a bit like flexible working. It will those employers who catch on early that protecting the employees' data and making them the kind of controller of it in their own right will make you a more acceptable employer for the very highest talent.
What are some of the trends that you're seeing in the UK and maybe a bit broadly in Europe regarding employee data and the employee experience?
I think they're scratching their head to know what to do with employee data. I think enterprise as a whole has gone down a very old school, so kind of Facebook, Google tracking. This is the way we want to go. This is the answer to track as in a kind of parent-child relationship, rather than to allow the employee to have access to their own data, and when they want to share it, share it. But I think we're seeing, certainly in some, again, it's the kind of the equivalent of sports teams type culture, where the high talent areas, and again, I expect it to kind of spread out across the rest of the industry. We're seeing that that's changing. That the relationship between an employee and their data is not part of the employers, or at least shared with the employer as part of the alliance. And I think that's the right way to go. I think ultimately, again, it will come around to the employer will be more attractive because they're kind of co-authoring in an alliance, rather than getting you in as a kind of old school employee.
The reason why so many executives are still skeptical of the employee experience concept is that they have no idea on how to tie it to business outcomes. So what metrics in your minds should companies put in place to measure the effectiveness of their EX initiatives and the impact on the business?
I guess, so if they haven't already got any kind of customer experience ones that line up to their productivity, then I think, that any of those would be a good idea. I mean, we know that there is a direct correlation between engagement and productivity. And the Gallup, what was the latest one last year? 2000. In fact, I think it was this year, 2017 or 2018. It's around 150% if both the employee and the customer are engaged. A kind of uptake in turnover. So those metrics are already out there. There are some engagement-specific ones. So there's so if you wanted to do questionnaires, for instance, there's it's called UWES, which is the Utrecht Work Engagement Scale, which is an international questionnaire, which then allows you to know how engaged your employees are. But then you would have to then tie that yourself to your own productivity. But I think you could, again, it's the nuances in what is your output in your area. And I think it would be relatively easy to tie your own output figures to what you're seeing in terms of your engagement scores in that sense. But I mean, obviously, with People First, you could look at flow in that area and tie that to whether there were any production or output gains. So yeah, they're the main ones that come to the top of my mind.
When a company decides to design or to put together an EX program or plan, it has to define what the framework is going to be. But somehow
Absolutely.
The company needs to customize some of the outcomes and some of the metrics to what specific teams or divisions within the company are doing, right? The way employees should be engaged may differ if they work in a call center versus if they work in sales, in accounting, or on a production floor. So all in all, the framework will be very similar, but specific initiatives or specific outcomes will be measured differently based on what their place in the company is.
Absolutely. Whether I'm intrinsically or extrinsically motivated, whether I'm expecting to be here for a long time or not, whether my projects are based on. That's absolutely. There's got to be a level of customization, but as you say, there'll be a baseline of here's the things that we we generally need to know.
Can you tell us a bit more about what is People First exactly, and how People First, the software, supports the employee experience efforts and employee engagement?
So it's a software platform that is based around this work ethos that we talked around. So in terms of so it's everything you need for work. It's kind of HR, engagement. There's a social element to it. In terms of flow, there's a kind of check-ins, so kind of automatic check-ins, which then tie up with an intelligent assistant that allows you to do the bits that you need to do. So it's difficult to put it into a particular bracket, but in the loosest sense, it's kind of HR management come social productivity type tool, but it's a bit more than that, because it's a holistic work tool. People don't silo off learning from engagement from anything else, and neither should a software tool. So it's also a platform. So in terms of kind of CX and EX, we could integrate with any other system if there was a specific thing that you needed to tie up. But again, if you wanted to tie up, for instance, the flow that was happening in your teams with a particular NPS score or however else you measured, then we could do an integration for that, or a partner could do an integration for that. So it's extensible.
How would you try to define the right balance between the employee autonomy in the employee experience as a whole versus how many efforts an organization should spend on defining and designing specific guidelines and rules and processes around their EX plans or programs?
I think inherent in the question there is you're probably saying that people who have more autonomy are probably more valuable in the talent pool. I think that may be right. I think those who are intrinsically motivated by something, who would do it even if they didn't get paid type thing, are probably more valuable, and therefore, yes, I would think about doing that. But that's not to say if I was extrinsically, I'm a super high performer, but I just for a salesperson, for instance, it's effectively about how much money I can earn, but I'm really good. Then I don't know whether I think it depends on the organisation what your balance was between one thing and another, and it's really understanding your people and the blend of your people that you need in order to function that would decide that. I hope that answers your question.
Yes. How would you define the employee experience and the culture within MHR based on what we discussed today? I think we're a funny mix. We're quite so we've been going 20. Don't quote me on this. 25, or no longer than that. I think quite 30 years. So we're kind of facing all the time as a software house, but we're growing quite rapidly. We're now 750 employees, something like that. And so we're seeing a sea change in the way that our culture was, from something that was a bit more traditional to something that is more flexible, and of all the things that we've talked about today. I think what's great for us is that the best products come from a need that you have yourself. Right.
And I think the fact that we're exploring stuff for ourselves as we are building the product for other people means that we get we get all the snags at the same time. We have the same philosophical debates as other companies will have, so We have the same pushback, so this is not a utopia by any means here, and we get real world feedback because People First sounds quite a utopian product, but it isn't, absolutely isn't, because we've gone through the mill of, okay, well, what does it mean in the real world with the same people as any normal business? You've got some grumpy people, you've got some idealistic people, you've got some down-to-earth people, the whole mix is here. So yeah, it's really good for us, I think.
Where do you see the future of? I know it's a very broad and probably vague question, but where do you see the future of work, and how do you see companies looking for candidates and employees actually picking up the companies that they really want to work for?
Yeah, that is quite a broad question. I think so. I think definitely we'll continue the trend of I think it'll be more upfront what you're getting out of a job. So I think much like people go to Google but know that it's going to be very hard work whilst they're there, but it's not a long-term plan for them. And again, like Netflix will do a tour of duty. I think we'll see much more tours of duty, which is, this is a project which is 6 months. We need your skills. You'll come in for potentially a higher wage than you would normally do if it was a permie, but you're in. So I think we'll see a lot more multiple. The trend towards multiple employments, project-based, bringing together a team. Is a bit more like doing a film, in that you're going to bring all these people together for a project, and then it may take 6 months, it may take 2 years, but it'll be done and then gone. So, because I think automation will take over the efficiency of most companies, but the extra bit will be so the human bit will be kind of people sourced much like they do on a film, and then disbanded and then sourced again. And that your long-term relationships will come not from specific employers, but from the relationships around those teams.
Is it what we call the gig economy?
Yeah, a bit. I guess the gig economy makes it sound like it's, or certainly over in the EU and the UK, it always sounds like it's low paid, and I think we'll see that kind of employment at both ends of the spectrum. I think we'll see it very much like sports teams, so at the high end, Netflix is very much like a sports team. In fact, that's what they say on their kind of induction materials. So yeah, I think the kind of buzzword gig economy will go away, because that's how most people will work.
So if the future of work is mostly around projects as you described, how do you see the company cultures evolving, and how do you see organizations trying to define ways and initiatives to engage with their employees, knowing that they will probably stay with them maybe for 6 months or a year until the project is completing, and then they will move on?
I think, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think psychologically it's bad to stay at a job for an indefinite amount of time without actually knowing when your end point is.
Right.
That's why I'd come back to tours of duty. I think if up front you said, right, this is a 2-year thing, and this is what we're trying to achieve in those 2 years, and then you come to the end of that, you're 3 months away, or 6 months away, and the dialogue has to start again. What is value for me? Both me as an employee, is our alignment still the same? Do I still want to do this again? Or is there something, or is the employer actually wanting something different for a different project? It's a bit like when Netflix went from DVDs to streaming. The relationships changed. So you've got to have a conversation. But psychologically, it's incredibly important to know here's the end game. And it takes all those awful situations away where you've got to have, you kind of performance manage people out of the door, which can take years, And actually, all it needed was a conversation right at the beginning to say, well, here's what we're going to do for the next 3 years. And an alignment conversation near the end of those 3 years to say, is this still what we want to do? And it's a change between a kind of adult-to-adult relationship rather than a parent-child one.
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier on in our conversation. And what is interesting is I remember seeing a few weeks ago a graphic on the average of employee tenure in the Silicon Valley. And interestingly, between the Facebook and the Google and Apple and so forth, the average tenure was about a bit less than 2 years, while Facebook had the longest tenure, about 2.1 or 2.2 years, while a company like Google was at 1.8, which is very surprising when you think of this, because all those companies promote how healthy and engaging and welcoming and motivating their cultures are. At the same time, those employees stay a very short period of time, only about 2 years in average, which is insane.
Yeah, I think so. You're going to learn a lot. It's going to be incredibly difficult, high pressure, and you're expected to work long hours. But ultimately, these engineers know that they can go and get something else, and if they can't go and get something else, they'll try a startup. So I don't think there's much jeopardy in that market. I think there's more jeopardy in other markets where you would be saying, will I get another job? It's a bit like when you start contracting. The first 3 or 4 contracts are, you're very nervous about whether you're going to get one, or you don't want to stop. You stop work before you go into another job. But then after you get used to the fact that things will be okay, then everything starts to relax and you take breaks in between your working. And I think, so I think the trend is going to go that way. I think Silicon Valley is slightly different in that there's not so much jeopardy that you won't get a job if it doesn't work out, or you leave, or you try something new.
Before we conclude our conversation today, let me ask you some fun questions as we're getting to the end of the episode today. Just so that our listeners get to know you as a guest a bit more intimately. If you were to invite a historical figure to dinner, who would you pick and why?
I'd pick Picasso because he seems like a really interesting guy. I know he was creative, and he was like famous while he was alive, and and had all kind of interest in partners and everything. Yeah, he seems like a fun guy.
Okay. Well, I've got to ask you a silly question. Since you live in the UK, were you stuck in front of your TV for Harry's and Meghan's wedding?
No, I didn't watch it. Actually, I was in the garden, and the next door neighbours had it on, and I could hear a kind of church service, so I knew it was on. But no, it wasn't something that I watched. No.
Okay, what was your dream job as a kid?
When I was little, I used to pretend that I could. I was a DJ and I could scratch. I remember scratching up all my old vinyl records terribly because I was really bad at it. So yeah, I thought I was kind of Terminator X or something when I was little.
All right, what is your favorite type of food?
It's something called Bakewell slices. I don't know whether they have it in the States. So it's kind of an almondy tart with icing on top and raspberry jam. The specific ones is Mr. Kipling's bake. I'll send you some. They're very Moorish. Good with a glass of red wine there.
Okay, interesting. I don't know if you'll go through customs though, but why not? What is the essential item that you always take with you when you go on vacation?
Oh, tea bags, straight away.
All right,
No doubt about it.
All right, so are you a tea bag type of guy, or are you more of the bulk tea?
No, it's tea for me. I don't. I get a kind of. Sometimes I have a flat white boost at about 2:00. But no, if I'm going on holiday, I can get a decent coffee on holiday, but I can't get a decent tea.
Is it black dark tea or with milk?
It is the trashiest kind of normal tea you can imagine. Yeah, so there's not posh tea at all. It is, pretty standard kind of working man's tea.
Do you put
builder's tea? Builder's tea, we'd call it in the UK.
Do you put any milk in it?
Yes, a little bit of milk. Yeah.
That's something that I just can't stand. All right. What is? I'm a big fan of London. I've been to London many, many times, and I grew up in Brittany, so just across the English Channel from you guys.
Yeah.
And I spent quite a few summers in southwest England. But I love London. If you were to pick one spot in London that you like the most, which one would it be?
There's the Millennium Bridge that goes over to the, there's an art gallery on that side. I think it's the Tate Modern on the other side. So it's St Paul's on one side and Tate Modern on the other. And if you get the right amount of wetness, you can kind of slide on it, like, what are those boots with wheels on the bottom? Not roller skates, but inline skates. If you get the right amount of wetness on this bridge, you can kind of swish across it like you're on inline skates. I don't advise doing that when there's too many other people around, but it's a lot of fun. It's one of the most beautiful sights. So St Paul's and then the other side of the river, but then kind of sliding across like that, it makes you feel like a kid, and it's beautiful at the same time.
Quite interesting. What is the way for our listeners to follow you, MHR, and People First on social media?
So I'm at Futurelix, so FUTURLIX on Twitter. And I'm on LinkedIn as Mark Williams MHR, and you can find People First on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. Just type in People First, and it's the ones with the pink smiley face.
All right,
and Google.
We'll share that on the podcast notes as well. Any last word of advice or wisdom?
Not really. Try a bakewell slice with red wine and slide across Millennium Bridge, I think.
All right, I'll make sure to try this.
Yeah, send me a video when you do.
I will. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for sharing some insights with us today. Again, it was Mark Williams, Chief Marketing Officer at MHR and People First. Mark, thanks for being with us today.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.